My name is Clara Voss and I am 31 years old. On a Thursday morning in October, I drove 4 hours to my father's house with a box of moving supplies and a key I'd had since I was 19. I put the key in the lock. It didn't turn. I tried it again. Slowly. The way you do when you're certain it has to be right. It wasn't right. The lock was different. Brand new brushed nickel, still bright, not a scratch on it. There was a note taped to the glass panel beside the door. A half sheet of printer paper, folded once. My name on the outside. Spelled wrong. Clara. I unfolded it. Asterisk, this is a private residence. Please contact me before coming to the property going forward. I need some time and space to grieve and to sort through Theo's belongings in my own way. I hope you can respect that. Renata, asterisk. I stood on that porch for a moment. Cold morning. The maple in the front yard had gone red while I wasn't looking. Leaves coming down one at a time. I read the note again. Then I took out my phone and photographed it. I photographed the new lock. I photographed the door, the address, the street. The way I've seen people photograph accident scenes before anyone moves anything. Because I already knew something Renata did not. I put the note in my coat pocket, walked back to my car, and drove 2 miles down Route 9 to a coffee shop called Miller's that had been there since I was a child. I ordered something I didn't drink. And then I called a real estate attorney. Before I tell you what happened after that call, if you've ever had someone try to lock you out of something that was already yours, you already know the exact feeling I had sitting in that parking lot. That very specific cold stillness. Stay with me. Asterisk, welcome to Deep Karma Stories. We tell quiet stories about ordinary people who hold their ground without ever raising their voice. If this story speaks to you, drop a comment below and be sure to subscribe. And tell me where you're watching from. I love knowing where in the world you are tonight. Asterisk. Let me take you back. Not to the beginning of this story, exactly. But to the beginning of the house. Because you can't understand what happened without understanding what that house meant, and you can't understand that without understanding my father. His name was Theodore Voss. Everyone called him Theo. He was a quiet man who wore the same style of flannel shirt in 3 different colors and kept a jar of spare change on the kitchen counter that he said was for emergencies, but mostly went toward ice cream. He grew up in that house. His mother bought it in 1974, a small brick colonial on Ashford Street in a mid-sized city in central Ohio. 3 bedrooms, 1.5 baths, a kitchen that hadn't been updated since the 1990s and didn't need to be. Out back, a yard with a maple tree that had always grown slightly sideways, as if it was leaning to look over the fence, and that nobody had ever corrected because after a point it was just the way things were. My parents divorced when I was 6. I lived with my mother in Pittsburgh during the school year, and I came to Ashford Street every summer and every other holiday, and as many weekends as I could manage. That house was mine the way places are yours when you're a child, completely, without paperwork, without question. I knew which step on the back porch would give under your weight. I knew the cedar closet in the hallway smelled like cedar even in summer, and like something close to winter in December. I knew my father kept his important papers in a shoebox in the top of that closet, rubber-banded in neat groups, and I knew the shoebox had a faded sports logo on it from a team that hadn't existed in 30 years. He raised me in the summers on that porch. On cereal in front of cartoons, on long drives to nowhere in particular, on honest, unhurried conversations about things that mattered and things that didn't. He wasn't a man who said a great deal. But what he said, he meant. When I was 19, I was visiting for a long weekend in late October. A Thursday afternoon. We were sitting at the kitchen table with grilled cheese sandwiches, and my father was reading the newspaper, and I was reading a paperback I'd brought, and out of the blue, without looking up from the paper, he said, "I put your name on the deed." I looked up. "What deed?" "The house deed." He turned a page. Asterisk, I did it last week. Joint tenancy. You and me both. If something ever happens to me, I don't want anyone making decisions about this house except you. So I fixed it. Asterisk. I didn't know what to say. I was 19. I barely understood what a deed was. Dad, why would something happen to you? He finally looked up. He had the kind of eyes that were always a little amused at the edges, even when the rest of his face was serious. Something happens to everyone eventually, Clara, He went back to the paper. I just like to be ready. I thought about it for a minute, and then I went back to my book. That was the whole conversation. No ceremony, no signatures at the table, no big moment. Just my father taking care of a thing the way he took care of most things, quietly, ahead of schedule, without making a fuss. I was 29 when he met Renata. I was living in Columbus by then, about 2 hours south, working in hospital administration. I came up to Ashford Street most months. My father had never remarried after my mother had never really dated as far as I knew. So when he called to tell me there was a woman he wanted me to meet, I took it seriously. Her name was Renata Holt. She was 56, divorced once, with 2 adult sons who lived out of state. She had good manners, and she laughed easily, and she brought wine to our first dinner, which I noted and appreciated. My father seemed lighter when she was in the room. He sat up a little straighter. I told myself that was enough. That was all I needed to see. I was right and I was wrong in different ways than I knew. Renata moved in after they'd been together for about 18 months. I found out on a Sunday phone call. My father mentioned it almost in passing, the way he told me about the deed, as a thing already decided, not a thing to discuss. He said they were happy and that she was bringing her furniture from her apartment and would I like the old reading chair from the living room since he was making room. I took the chair. I kept my thoughts to myself. Here is how a house changes when someone new moves in. It starts with small things. Rearrangements. Renata liked the mugs on a different shelf. She didn't care for the artwork that had been on the hallway wall since the 1980s, framed botanical prints my grandmother had chosen, and replaced them with a gallery of photographs, mostly of her sons at various ages. Handsome boys, I'm sure. But strangers to me, strangers to that hallway. The kitchen counter where my father kept his jar of change was cleared. The jar turned up in the garage. I noticed these things when I visited. I said nothing. These were small things. He was happy. That mattered more. What I noticed over the following year was harder to name. Renata was always perfectly pleasant to me when I came. Offered coffee. Remembered details about my job. Made conversation without difficulty. But there was something in how the visits began to feel. A slight formality that hadn't been there before. A sense that I was a guest where I had always been the opposite of a guest. Once, I was there for a weekend in February. I arrived on a Friday evening and found that the back porch light wasn't on. My father always left the back porch light on when I was coming, going back to my childhood. A small thing. Probably a coincidence. I let myself in the front, which had also never been the custom. My father came out of the kitchen looking pleased to see me. Renata followed a beat behind. She had not known what time I was coming, she explained warmly. She would have had things ready. Next time, she said, just text me too so I can plan. I'm her daughter, I thought, and did not say. By the following year, Renata had begun mentioning the house in a way that interested me. Casually at first. The market in the neighborhood was strong. A house 2 blocks over had sold for considerably more than anyone expected. Had my father thought about where he'd want to be long-term? The house was lovely but large for 2 people. Had we ever talked about what the practical plan looked like? My father's answer to these conversations was always the same. He liked the house. He'd always liked the house. He wasn't interested in moving. Renata would nod and let it go for a while, and then she'd find her way back to it from a different angle. She was patient. I noticed that she was patient. Then my father had a cardiac event. He was 63. He was in the middle of cutting the grass. He was inside and calling 911 before he fully understood what was happening, which is the kind of thing that tells you a person has good instincts. 12 days in the hospital. Stents placed. Discharged with a list of restrictions and a follow-up schedule that looked like a part-time job. I drove up the same afternoon I got the call. Got there before visiting hours ended and stayed in the waiting room through the night with a cup of terrible coffee and a paperback I couldn't read. Renata was there when I arrived. She had been there since it happened. She was organized. I'll give her that. She had already spoken to 2 of his doctors, had the discharge instructions printed and annotated, had arranged for his prescriptions to be called into the pharmacy near the house. She was good in a crisis. I acknowledged that genuinely. But I also noticed how she moved in those 12 days. She became the person who spoke to the doctors. She answered questions when I thought they were directed at me. She made decisions about the visiting schedule that I hadn't been consulted on, then informed me of them. Small things. Crisis things. Things you let happen when a man you love is lying in a hospital bed, and efficiency is what the moment requires. I sat on the edge of my father's bed on the third day. He looked smaller. That's the word I keep coming back to. Smaller. Like the illness had taken some physical mass along with it. He held my hand for a moment, and he said, "You know where everything is." I thought he meant practically. The insurance papers. The garage door code. I said, "I know, Dad. Don't worry, asterisk." He nodded slowly, like a man who had said the thing he needed to say and could now rest. He recovered. Came home. Moved more carefully than before, tired more easily. But he recovered. And I drove back to Columbus with a feeling I couldn't entirely name, watching the house get smaller in my rearview mirror, and told myself he was fine. He died 14 months later. In his sleep. On a Wednesday night in September, peacefully, the way you hope for and don't expect. I got the call from Renata at 5:47 in the morning. I was already half awake the way I always am before 6, and I knew before she said anything. You know the calls. Before the voice arranges itself into words, you know. I drove up. The house looked exactly the same from the outside. Porch light on. The maple going early, the way it always did in September. I sat in the car for a moment before going in because the wrongness of a world that looks unchanged when everything has changed is its own particular weight, and you have to absorb it before you move. The week of the funeral was practical and hard, and I got through it. Renata held herself together with a kind of rigid dignity that I respected. She was genuinely grieving. I did not doubt that. She had loved my father in the real way, not the performed way. I held on to that. But 4 days after the funeral, I came into the kitchen in the morning and found a printout on the table. A comparative market analysis. 3 comparable properties on the street, their sale prices, an estimated range for 47 Ashford. I stood in the kitchen in my socks and looked at it for a moment. Then I poured my coffee and sat down and said, carefully, Renata. I need us to have a conversation about the house, She sat across from me. She had that patient look. I know this is hard, she said. Losing him. Everything is so raw right now. But Theo would have wanted us to be practical. He was always so practical, He was, I agreed. This house is a lot to manage, she said. For one person. And the market is really Renata, I kept my voice even. I want to make sure you know something before we go any further. My name is on the deed to this house. Joint tenancy with right of survivorship. My father added it when I was 19. I looked at her steadily. That means when he died, his interest passed entirely to me. Legally, I'm the sole owner, She looked at me. A long moment. Of course you're on the deed, she said finally. Her tone careful, recalibrating. We'll have to talk to an attorney about what all of that means. There may be things to sort out, I said, I've already spoken to one. Which was a small lie, in the sense that I hadn't yet. But I made it true within 48 hours. She nodded once. Said something about being tired and excused herself from the table. I sat there with my coffee and watched her go. I was not afraid. I was paying attention. 3 weeks later, I drove back to Ashford Street to collect my father's personal items. His watch, which his own father had given him. A box of letters he'd kept from the time before email. The photo albums in the hallway closet, 2 of them, one from his childhood and one from mine. I parked in front of the house and walked up the porch steps with my empty box. Put the key in the lock. It didn't turn. I looked at the lock. Brand new brushed nickel. I tried the key again. Still nothing. And then I saw the note taped to the glass, folded once, my name spelled wrong on the outside. I stood there on that porch for a moment. Cold October morning. Leaves coming down from the maple one at a time. I photographed the note. I photographed the lock. I walked back to my car, drove to Miller's coffee shop 2 miles down Route 9, ordered something I didn't drink. And I called a real estate attorney. Asterisk, if you've ever stood outside a door that was always yours and found it locked against you, you know what that moment feels like. The stillness of it. The decision it forces. Asterisk. Asterisk, stay with me. This is where it turns. Asterisk. Asterisk, if you haven't yet, subscribe and drop your city in the comments. I love knowing where you're watching from tonight. Asterisk. Her name was Patricia Correll. She'd been recommended by a colleague, a paralegal who'd said only, asterisk, she's precise and she doesn't waste time. Tell her what you have. Asterisk. I told her what I had, sitting in my car in the parking lot of Miller's coffee shop with my untouched coffee going cold in the cup holder. I told her the whole thing plainly. The way I give information when I need someone to actually hear me in order, without editorializing, just the facts. My father had added my name to the deed in a joint tenancy with right of survivorship 19 years ago. He died 3 weeks ago. I had been inside the house the week of the funeral. I drove back this morning and found a new lock and a note from his widow asking me to contact her before coming to the property. Patricia Correll was quiet while I talked. When I finished, she asked 3 questions. Your name is currently on the deed as a joint tenant? Yes. It was recorded at the county recorder's office the October after I turned 19. I have a copy. And the right of survivorship language is explicit? It's in the deed. I have read it. When your father died, was there any additional conveyance, any document transferring his interest to his wife? Not that I know of. I have seen no such document. She was quiet for a moment. I heard her typing. All right, she said. Here's what I'm looking at in your county records right now. I waited. Asterisk, your name is here. The joint tenancy language is here. Right of survivorship is standard for this type of deed in Ohio. Asterisk, a pause. Asterisk, when your father died, his interest in the property passed automatically to you by operation of law. His wife inherited nothing from this property through his death. You are the sole owner. Asterisk. The parking lot of Miller's coffee shop was quiet on a Thursday morning. A woman walked a dog past the window. A truck idled at the light. So what she did. Changing the lock on a property you solely own without your knowledge or consent. Patricia Correll's voice was precise and unhurried. Asterisk, that is unlawful exclusion. In plain terms, trespass. Asterisk. I let out a breath I think I had been holding since I pulled into the driveway. What do I do? You do nothing visible yet, she said. Asterisk, you build the record first. Then you send a notice. Then you let the notice do the work. Asterisk. Over the next week, I did what she told me to do. I gathered the certified copy of the deed from the county recorder's office. You can order them online now, which seems wrong for something so important and is also very convenient. I ordered my father's death certificate. I printed and organized the photographs I'd taken at the door. I went back to my email and found the one Renata had sent me 2 days after she'd changed the lock. I need some time to go through Theo's things privately. I hope you understand, and forwarded it to Patricia. Then I made one more call. To the real estate agent whose name had been on the comparative market analysis I'd found on the kitchen table. She was professional and slightly mortified. She had no idea, she said, about the title situation. She had received a call from Mrs. Voss, she meant Renata, about listing the property, had sent a representative to walk through, had a listing agreement prepared. I need you to terminate that agreement, I said. The property has one owner and it isn't Mrs. Voss. She terminated it that afternoon. I asked for confirmation in writing. She sent it. Another document for the file. Patricia sent the formal notice the following Monday. Certified mail, return receipt requested. It informed Renata that under Ohio property law, the undersigned Clara Voss was the sole legal owner of 47 Ashford Street, that the recent change of locks constituted unlawful exclusion of the owner from her property, and that she was required within 72 hours to restore the original lock or provide a key to the new one, vacate any listing agreement currently in place, and cease any activity related to sale or disposition of the property. I did not call Renata. I did not text her. I did not tell family members what was happening. I did not post about it. I went to the grocery store. I made dinner. I did my laundry. My hands were completely steady. She called at 11:14 on Tuesday morning. I know because I checked the timestamp on the certified mail receipt before I answered, and the receipt showed delivery at 10:49. She had waited 25 minutes. Not long. I let it ring twice. Then I answered. She did not sound like a grieving widow. She sounded like a woman who had made a calculation and found the answer unacceptable. I don't know what you think you're doing, she said. I said nothing. Your father wanted me to have this house. Her voice was controlled. Tight. Everyone understood that. He wouldn't have wanted you to do this to me. Renata, I said. This call may be recorded. I'd suggest speaking to your own attorney before we continue. A pause. I have an attorney, she said. Good, I kept my voice even. Have them contact Patricia Correll. Her information is on the notice. I ended the call. She did have an attorney. Within the week, his letter arrived, a slightly younger associate from a small firm in the county, not an estate specialist. The letter argued that the joint tenancy deed had been signed under circumstances suggesting undue influence, and that my father had intended for Renata to inherit the property and should therefore be considered his primary beneficiary. I read the letter twice. Then I forwarded it to Patricia. Her response took less than a day. A formal, precise reply asking for documentation of the alleged undue influence. When was the incapacity alleged to have occurred? The deed in question was executed and recorded 19 years ago, when the decedent was a healthy 44-year-old with no documented cognitive impairment. His wife at the time of the deed was my client's late mother, from whom he divorced 7 years after the recording. What is the legal basis for a claim of undue influence across a 19-year span? The counterclaim dissolved in 8 days. I know because the associate sent a brief letter withdrawing the argument and indicating his client was exploring other options. Patricia called me when she received it. Options, she said, are not a legal term. They have nothing, Then Renata went to the family. My father had 2 siblings, a sister, my Aunt Rosalind, and a brother, my Uncle Pete, both of whom lived within an hour of Ashford Street and had been at the funeral and were, I think, genuinely fond of Renata and genuinely confused by what was happening. She called them. She called cousins I hadn't spoken to in years. She told her version of events, which, to be fair to her, was probably the version she actually believed, that my father had always intended the house to go to her, that the deed situation was a formality or an oversight, that I was being legalistic and cold at an emotionally vulnerable time. My Aunt Rosalind called me on a Thursday evening. Can you just work something out? She said. Her voice was careful, trying to be kind to both of us at once. She did love him, Clara. She's devastated. I know she did, I said. And I'm not trying to punish her for that. Then why? Because the house has been in my name for 19 years, I said gently. My father chose to put it there. That was his decision, and it was made soberly and in writing. I didn't create this situation, Rosalind. I'm just not going to pretend it doesn't exist. She went quiet. He knew, I said. He was planning ahead. That's who he was. She sighed. She didn't agree out loud. But she stopped pushing. I didn't argue with the others who called. I said the same thing to each of them, plainly, without heat. Then I let them make up their own minds. The 72 hours in the notice passed. Renata did not provide a key. She did not restore the original lock. She did not contact Patricia. She did, however, leave the house. I know because a neighbor, Mrs. Lindqvist, who had lived next door to my father for 20 years and who had my cell number from a Christmas card exchange, texted me on day 3 to say she had seen a car loaded with bags leave the property the previous evening. She added, I'm sorry about your father. He was a wonderful man, I thanked her. I sat with that for a moment. Then I called a locksmith. Patricia met me at the house on a Friday morning. She drove a silver sedan and wore a gray coat, and she was matter-of-fact about the whole business in the way of a person who has done this many times and finds efficiency more respectful than ceremony. The locksmith she'd arranged was already waiting when we arrived, a young man with a van that said Keystone Security on the side and a kind of professional incuriosity that I appreciated. He looked at the lock, confirmed it was a standard deadbolt, and asked which key profile I wanted the replacement to be. I said the same as the original if he could manage it. He could. He worked for about 15 minutes. Patricia stood near the porch railing with her briefcase and her phone, and let the moment be what it was without filling it with conversation. I appreciated that too. The locksmith handed me 2 keys. I put one in the lock. It turned. I stood there for a moment with my hand on the door handle. The maple in the front yard was full red now, the way it only gets in late October, and a leaf came down and landed on the porch step, and I watched it instead of going inside immediately because I needed a breath first. Then I went in. The house smelled like cedar and something slightly different now, Renata's perfume, maybe, or her cleaning products, a new scent layered over the old one. I stood in the front hallway and waited for that to settle. She had moved things. Not destructively, not maliciously, there was no vandalism, nothing broken. But the botanical prints were still gone from the hallway, replaced by her photographs of her sons. My grandmother's china, which had always been in the hutch in the dining room, was in boxes in the back bedroom, clearly packed for transport and left behind when she left in a hurry. The kitchen had her dishes in the cabinets and her things on the counters. The jar of spare change was still in the garage. I went and got it and put it back on the counter. I walked slowly through the house, down the hallway, past the back bedroom, into the room that had always been mine when I visited, a small room with a window that looked out at the sideways maple and a bookshelf that still had 3 paperbacks I'd left on a visit 4 years ago and never retrieved. She hadn't touched this room. I don't know why. Maybe she hadn't gotten to it. Maybe something stopped her. I sat on the edge of the bed for a while and looked out at the tree. Then I went to the cedar closet. On the top shelf, behind a box of Christmas ornaments, behind a container of extra light bulbs, was the shoebox with the faded sports logo, still rubber-banded in neat groups. I took it down. In the back, behind the insurance papers and the appliance manuals and the folded copy of the deed, my name printed on it in counter-quarter font, small and official and permanent, there was an envelope. My name on the outside. His handwriting. I took the box and the envelope out to the backyard and sat down under the sideways maple in the October cold with my coat pulled around me. The envelope had been sealed and then reopened and resealed, the way you do when you write something and then second-guess it and then decide to leave it anyway. Inside, a single page, folded in thirds. His handwriting, the careful printed letters of a man who'd learned to write before cursive went out of fashion. I won't read it to you word for word. Some things are just yours. But what he said, in essence, was this. He'd put my name on the deed when I was 19 because he had already learned, by watching his own parents, that death creates a vacuum and vacuums get filled. Not by bad people necessarily, he wrote, but by whoever is standing nearest and most certain they know what the dead person would have wanted. He said he loved Renata. He wanted me to know that was real. He said she was a good woman who had made him happy in years that could have been lonely. He said, but this house is yours, Clara. It always was. I just made the paperwork match the truth, And then, near the bottom, I told you something happens to everyone eventually. I'd just like to be ready. I hope you do too, I sat under the sideways maple for a long time. The cold didn't bother me. I want to pause here for a moment. Because if someone in your life ever did a quiet thing to protect you, something you only understood later, I want to hear about it. Tell me in the comments. I read everyone, and if you're still with me, thank you for staying. The next part won't take long. But I think it's the part that matters most, The legal matters resolved with less drama than you might expect. Renata's attorney made one more attempt, a letter suggesting that the estate should include the house as a marital asset subject to distribution. Patricia's response was 3 sentences long and cited 3 cases by name, and we did not hear back. The real estate listing was fully withdrawn. I did not seek damages. I did not file any claim against Renata. I had no interest in punishing her, I want to be honest about that. She had gambled on a version of events that didn't match the paperwork, and she had lost cleanly. That was consequence enough. What I wanted was the house. What I wanted was my father's things undisturbed to sort through in my own time. I took 2 weeks off work and stayed at Ashford Street. I sorted through everything myself. The letters in the shoebox. The photo albums. His tools in the garage, organized by type the way he'd always kept them, and I sat on an upturned crate in there one afternoon and just looked at the organization of it, because that was so entirely him. A man who believed in having the right tool and knowing where it was. His coffee mug was in a box Renata had packed and left in the back bedroom. The mug itself was nothing special, a faded green one from a diner that had closed years ago, the kind of object that has no monetary value and every other kind. I washed it and put it back on the hook by the stove. Some things Renata had brought in, I boxed carefully and left at the front door with a note through Patricia asking her to arrange collection. Her sons came on a Saturday afternoon. They were polite young men who looked uncomfortable and said very little and took the boxes and left. I don't hold anything against them. My Aunt Rosalind came for a weekend in November. She walked through the house quietly and helped me go through some things, and we talked about my father the way you do when someone is recently gone, stories that start with "do you remember" and end with long pauses. On the second morning, she said, he knew what he was doing. He always did, I said. I think Renata really did believe it would go to her, she said carefully. Asterisk, not because of any legal reason. Just because she loved him, and sometimes people confuse love with entitlement. Asterisk. I know, I said. I'm not angry at her. Rosalind looked at me. Then what are you? I thought about that. Sad, I said. Mostly sad. Because the truth is there was no version of this where I came out holding the house and also got to keep an uncomplicated memory of my father's last years. Renata was there for those years. She did love him. She was there the morning he died, and I was 2 hours away, and I arrived to find her already holding the shape of his absence like a thing she'd been handed. Grief is not a competition, and it doesn't divide cleanly. She lost him too. She called once, in December. She did not apologize. I wasn't expecting her to. She said she'd been thinking, and she wanted me to know that she believed Theo had meant for things to go differently. She still believed that. I understand, I said. Asterisk, but what he meant and what he wrote are the same thing in this case, Renata. He was a careful man. He didn't make mistakes on documents. Asterisk. She was quiet. I'm not trying to erase what you were to each other, I said. Asterisk, I'm not going to do anything to that house that would make him unrecognizable in it. It's going to be the same house. Asterisk. I heard her breathe. Good, she said, finally. And that was the last time we spoke. I didn't sell it. I know that's what you might have expected. The practical choice, the financially reasonable choice. A tower drive from Columbus, a house I can't easily rent, property taxes I'll pay every year whether I'm there or not. I didn't sell it. I go up most months. A weekend, sometimes a long weekend. I stay in the room with the bookshelf and the sideways maple outside the window. I've started leaving more things there, a second set of kitchen things, a real bookshelf instead of the old battered one, a good lamp. I found a copy of the original deed in the shoebox, the one from when my grandfather owned the property before my grandmother, going back to 1962. For names across 40 years, recorded at the county recorder's office in the same building with the same notary seal, each one a quiet decision about who this house belonged to. Mine will be the 5th. I haven't thought much about what comes after that. I'm 31. I have time. What I think about, when I drive up Route 9 and see the house come into view, is my father at the kitchen table with a grilled cheese sandwich on a Thursday afternoon, not looking up from his newspaper. I put your name on the deed. He wasn't sentimental about it. He was practical. He saw a future that hadn't happened yet, and he did the quiet paperwork to account for it. He didn't warn me it was coming. He didn't make a scene. He just fixed the thing and let the fixing sit there for 19 years until the morning it needed to be used. That's who he was. I walk in through the front door, my key, my lock, and the house smells like cedar. The jar of change is back on the counter. The second step from the bottom still gives under your weight. The maple in the backyard is still leaning sideways, still looking over the fence, still the way it's always been, and probably always will be. I think people expect these stories to end with a confrontation. A speech. Something said loudly in a room full of witnesses. This story didn't end that way. It ended in a county recorder's office, 19 years before it needed to, with a man who trusted the future enough to prepare for it and trusted his daughter enough not to explain too much. The lock was changed. The lock was changed back. That's the whole of it. But if there's something I carry from this, something I'd want you to carry too, if you're listening tonight with your own version of a door that feels like it might be locked against you someday, it's this. The quietest things are often the most permanent. My father didn't shout about that house. He didn't make anyone a speech about it. He filled out a form on a Thursday afternoon and had it recorded at the county and went back to his newspaper. A deed doesn't care how anyone feels. It doesn't care who's grieving or who believes they deserve something. It says what it says, in the plainest language, and it waits. He knew that. He was always ready. If this story reminded you of someone who prepared quietly for you, or if it reminded you to do the same thing for someone you love, I'd like to hear about it. Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. And if these stories are your kind of company in the evenings, I would be so glad to have you subscribe. It helps these stories reach the people who need them. Thank you for being here tonight. Thank you for listening. I'll see you in the next one.